They say power can make people forget their limits, until life reminds them. And on a quiet Thursday morning in Providence, Judge Frank Caprio was about to do exactly that. It began like any other day in the courtroom. The air was calm, the sound of shuffling papers and soft murmurs filled the room, but that calm wouldn't last long, because the next name on the docket belonged to a man who wasn't used to being told no. Richard Holbrook. 52 years old. Founder and CEO of one of Rhode Island's largest construction companies. A man known for his money, his ego, and his temper. The charge: reckless driving and verbal assault toward a police officer. Judge Caprio reviewed the file, brows furrowing slightly. The officer notes he used profanity and refused to cooperate during the stop, the clerk read aloud. The bailiff opened the door, and in walked Richard Holbrook, tall, confident, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expensive watch that probably cost more than most people's cars. He walked like he owned the courtroom, like this was just another board meeting he intended to control. He didn't sit right away. He stood there, glancing around as if measuring the worth of the room and the people inside it. Then he finally took his seat, smirking faintly as if this entire situation amused him. Judge Caprio greeted him with his usual calm professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Holbrook. You're here regarding charges of reckless driving and disorderly conduct. How do you plead?" Holbrook leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Good morning, Judge. Let's get one thing clear. I'm not here to play games." This was a misunderstanding. "I don't plead guilty to nonsense." Caprio paused. His tone stayed polite. "Mr. Holbrook, this is not a negotiation. It's a hearing. You may plead guilty, not guilty, or no contest." Holbrook shrugged. "Fine, not guilty. But let's be real. This whole thing's a joke." That officer overreacted. Caprio raised an eyebrow. "You were cited for driving 70 miles per hour in a 35 zone, nearly hitting a pedestrian, and then verbally abusing the officer when stopped. Does any of that sound like an overreaction?" Richard smiled condescendingly. "Judge, I run a $200 million company. I don't have time to crawl through traffic behind people who have nowhere to be. And that so-called pedestrian wasn't even on the crosswalk. I missed him by a mile." A ripple of discomfort moved through the courtroom. People exchanged looks. The arrogance in his tone was unmistakable. Caprio leaned forward slightly. "You're aware that speeding in a residential area isn't just a ticket. It's a potential hazard to human life." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, please, spare me the lecture. I've been driving for 30 years. Never had a real accident. If the city wants people to go slower, they should design better roads." Judge Caprio's expression remained neutral, but his tone lowered, steady and firm. "Mr. Holbrook, this courtroom is not your company. You don't give orders here. You listen," Holbrook smirked, leaning forward slightly. "I'm listening, Judge, but I'm also telling you, this whole thing is beneath me." That was the moment the room shifted. The quiet murmurs stopped. The energy changed. Caprio took a slow breath. "Mr. Holbrook, beneath you or not, you're still responsible for your actions. The law doesn't have a separate lane for the wealthy." Richard laughed under his breath. "That's funny, because I'm pretty sure my taxes pay for this entire system. So technically, I am the law's biggest supporter." The courtroom gasped softly. Even the bailiff looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Holbrook," Caprio said evenly, "you're dangerously close to being held in contempt. Do you understand what that means?" Richard shrugged again. Sure, I've heard that before. But you won't do it. You're too smart to go after a businessman who contributes to this city." Caprio's patience was visibly thinning, but his voice remained calm. The kind of calm that carries more power than shouting ever could. "This isn't about your company, Mr. Holbrook. This is about accountability. You're accused of reckless behavior that endangered others, and your words today suggest you don't take that seriously." Holbrook leaned forward. "I take my time seriously. I take productivity seriously. I don't take fabricated drama from overzealous cops seriously." Caprio's eyes narrowed slightly. "The officer's report states that you called him a glorified meter maid and refused to hand over your license." "That's not entirely true," Holbrook said, smirking. "I said he was acting like one." "That's not better," Caprio replied dryly. Richard chuckled, clearly enjoying the attention. "Look, I was frustrated. I had a major investor meeting. My phone was blowing up. I got pulled over by some rookie who thought he could bark orders at me. You can't expect me to just sit there quietly while he wastes my time." Caprio's tone turned colder. "So you insulted an officer, broke traffic laws, and now you're refusing to take responsibility?" Richard straightened his suit jacket. "I'm not refusing. I'm just not apologizing for something blown out of proportion." "You don't believe you owe an apology to the officer?" "Absolutely not," Richard said firmly. "I don't apologize to people who don't deserve it." The room went silent again. You could feel the tension thick in the air. Caprio set his pen down slowly. "Mr. Holbrook, do you know what's interesting about power?" he asked quietly. "It reveals people. It doesn't corrupt them. It exposes them." Richard tilted his head slightly, amused. "Nice line, Judge. Did you rehearse that one?" Caprio didn't blink. "No, I've lived it." For the first time, Richard didn't have a comeback ready. He just sat back, eyes narrowing slightly, as Caprio continued. "Power without humility isn't strength, Mr. Holbrook. It's weakness disguised as confidence. And your behavior today shows me more about your character than any business success ever could." Richard forced a small laugh. "So what now? You're going to lecture me until I feel guilty?" "I don't do guilt, Judge." Caprio folded his hands. "No, Mr. Holbrook, I don't intend to lecture you. But I do intend to hold you accountable," Richard scoffed. "And how exactly are you going to do that? Fine me? I'll pay it before lunch." Caprio leaned forward, his tone dropping to a quiet, commanding calm. "You seem to think money erases consequences, but I assure you, it doesn't. It just hides them. Until moments like this." For the first time, Richard's smirk faltered just slightly. Caprio continued. "This court doesn't measure people by their income. It measures them by their integrity. And so far, Mr. Holbrook, yours appears bankrupt." That line hit like a gavel before the gavel even struck. The courtroom stayed utterly silent. Caprio flipped through the file again. "According to this report, this is your third offense for reckless driving in the past 3 years. You've paid every fine, but learned nothing." Richard didn't respond. The confidence was still there, but now tinged with discomfort. Caprio looked up again. "You treat money like it's armor, but it won't protect you here. The law applies to everyone equally, Mr. Holbrook, even those who think they stand above it." Richard finally leaned forward, voice sharp. "You think you can intimidate me with words? I've faced senators, attorneys, auditors. You're just another bureaucrat reading from a rule book." Caprio met his gaze. "Perhaps, but this bureaucrat is the one deciding your sentence." The words hung in the air like thunder, and for the first time, Richard Holbrook didn't smile. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier now. Richard Holbrook's smirk was gone, replaced by a stiffness in his jaw. His fingers tapped impatiently on the desk, but his confidence was cracking, just slightly. Judge Caprio sat quietly for a moment, letting the silence work like gravity. Then he spoke. "Mr. Holbrook, do you have anything further to say before I render my decision?" Richard exhaled sharply. "Yeah, I think this is all overblown. You want to fine me? Fine, I'll pay it. Let's just move on." Caprio tilted his head slightly. "So even now you feel no responsibility for your actions?" Richard shrugged. "I told you. I don't apologize for things that don't matter." Caprio leaned forward slowly, resting his elbows on the bench. "A pedestrian had to jump back to avoid being struck by your car. You called an officer names. You disrupted the peace. And you think it doesn't matter? Richard crossed his arms, leaning back in defiance. I think we're wasting time on a non-issue. Nobody got hurt. Caprio nodded slowly. You're right about one thing. No one got hurt. But that wasn't because of you. It was despite you. The room went quiet again. The words sank deep, echoing through the courtroom like a slow, deliberate bell. Caprio continued, his voice softer now, almost reflective. Mr. Holbrook, I've sat in this chair for decades. I've seen all kinds of people. Rich, poor, guilty, innocent, broken, arrogant. But do you know what they all have in common? Richard didn't answer. They all think the rules are made for someone else, until the day the rules catch up to them. Richard shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, the silence wasn't power. It was exposure. Caprio glanced down at the file, then back up. I'm not going to fine you, Mr. Holbrook. That caught Richard off guard. You're not fining me? Caprio shook his head. No, fines don't teach men like you lessons. They're just receipts for bad behavior. Richard frowned. Then what are you doing? Caprio's voice steadied. You're going to spend your next 3 weekends performing community service in the very neighborhoods your company has disrupted with reckless construction and traffic violations. You'll help coordinate pedestrian safety programs, speak with local youth about responsibility, and assist with traffic control under police supervision. Richard's mouth fell slightly open. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm entirely serious, Caprio said calmly. You've been using money to dodge humility. Consider this. A correction. Richard's eyes flashed with disbelief. I don't do community service. I'm not picking up trash on the side of the road like some criminal. Caprio's tone hardened. You're not above anyone in this courtroom, Mr. Holbrook. You will serve this order, or I'll hold you in contempt, and that will involve real jail time. Do you prefer that alternative? Richard clenched his jaw, glaring. The veins on his neck tensed, but something in Caprio's unwavering calm told him this wasn't a bluff. After a long pause, Richard muttered through gritted teeth, Fine, whatever you say. Caprio raised an eyebrow. No, Mr. Holbrook, not whatever I say. Say it properly. Richard looked up, clearly irritated. Properly. Caprio leaned forward. This isn't about submission. It's about respect. I want to hear you acknowledge this court's authority and the impact of your actions. Richard scoffed under his breath. You're joking. Caprio didn't move. Try me. The room went deathly quiet again. All eyes were on Richard Holbrook, the man who always had the last word, who always spoke over others, who always walked away on top. And now, sitting in front of a judge who refused to bend, he finally hesitated. I acknowledge the court, Richard said flatly. Caprio looked unimpressed. And? Richard exhaled sharply, looking at the floor. And I'll do the service, Caprio nodded. That's a start. But you still haven't shown understanding. Tell me, do you think what you did was wrong? Richard's jaw tightened. I think I could have handled it better. Caprio tilted his head. That's not an apology. Richard met his gaze. And I told you, I don't… Caprio interrupted. Firm, but calm. Mr. Holbrook, do you have children? That question caught him off guard. 2, he said cautiously. Caprio nodded. Imagine your son watching you in this courtroom. Watching how you talk to authority. Watching how you treat others. Is that the example you want him to follow? Richard hesitated. That's not what this is about. It's exactly what this is about, Caprio said softly. Because our children don't become who we tell them to be. They become who we are. That landed harder than any legal argument could. For the first time, Richard's eyes flickered. Not with anger, but with a trace of discomfort. A flash of realization. Caprio saw it, and he pressed gently. Your company may build structures, Mr. Holbrook, but your actions today show me how easily a man can tear down his own foundation. Richard swallowed hard. The bravado was fading. The silence that followed wasn't defiance anymore. It was reflection. After several seconds, he finally spoke. Quietly. I could have handled it better, he said again. And maybe I should apologize to the officer. For what I said, Caprio nodded once, firmly. That's growth, Mr. Holbrook, not weakness. Richard looked up, meeting Caprio's gaze for the first time without a hint of arrogance. You really think that changes anything? Caprio smiled faintly. It changes you, and that's where real justice begins. The room stayed silent for a long moment. The kind of silence that feels sacred. Even the clerk had stopped typing. Finally, Caprio picked up his gavel. Mr. Holbrook, your sentence is confirmed. Community service for 3 weekends, and a formal written apology to the officer involved. Case concluded. He struck the gavel once, but Richard didn't get up right away. He sat there, hands clasped, looking down at the table. The arrogance had drained out of his posture completely. As the bailiff motioned him to leave, he glanced up one last time. Judge, he said quietly, for what it's worth. Maybe I did need this, Caprio nodded gently. That's the point of justice, Mr. Holbrook. Not to punish, but to remind. Richard gave a small nod before walking out. No smirk, no swagger, just quiet steps echoing in a room that had witnessed something rare. The humbling of a man who thought he could never be humbled. As the door closed behind him, Judge Caprio sighed softly and looked toward the next file on his desk. Another name, another case, another chance to balance justice with humanity. He glanced up, speaking to no one in particular. Power doesn't make a man, it reveals him. And with that, the courtroom continued.